In this presentation, we will cover the changes that were made to the immunization module from version 2.31 to version 251. The information we provide will be generic in nature and will not be state-specific. We will have user manuals available outlining what needs to be done for each state's registry. These manuals can be downloaded from sticomputer.com once available. The first important addition is the ability to configure a user's first, middle, and last name. This feature was added because the registries are requiring the full name for the person administering the vaccination, and prior to version 5.2, you were only able to designate a username, which did not distinguish between first, middle, and last. Users can be modified in either the Practice Manager administration tool or through Clinical. We'll look at modifying a user through Clinical. To do so, go to Edit, System Tables, Users. Highlight the user you would like to modify and click Properties. From within the User Maintenance dialog, you will see 3 new fields for name. If this user was created prior to 5.2, their full name, or previous username, will be in the last name field. You should modify this appropriately. Middle initial is not required. If you do not have the user's first and last name configured in the proper fields, you will receive errors from your state's registry and will need to resubmit information after correcting it. Click OK once you are done making changes, and Close to close the user's dialog. The next modification is in regards to the facility ID. Now, facility information must be configured through the immunization module so that facility information will be sent to the registry. To configure this information, in Practice Manager, open the immunization module by going to Add-ins, Run, Generate Immunization Batch Files. I am already logged into mine, but please remember that it will prompt you to log in again. Use the same credentials that you use to log into Practice Manager or Clinical. Once in the Vaccine Registry dialog, go to Tools, Configure Site IDs. When you do this, it will attempt to connect to the bi-directional registries, and you will see it say Loading in the Registry Format dropdown. Wait for them to load or until you receive this message that it cannot connect to the bi-directional registries. If it cannot connect, click OK to proceed. Click the Registry Format dropdown to select your registry. If you do not see your registry listed, please contact Practice Manager support and someone will activate it for you. Then click the lookup icon to select your office location. The list you see here is the list of facilities that you set up through Practice Manager. Highlight the appropriate facility and click OK. Then enter your site ID. Site IDs are assigned by the state registry, so if you are not aware of your site ID, please call your registry rep, not STI. Then click Add. If your practice has multiple locations, follow those steps again for each location. Even if you do not have multiple locations, you must designate one as the default by checking the default box. If by chance you forget to select the facility when entering the immunization record, the default site ID designated here will be used when exporting that record. When you are done, click Save. Now let's go back to Practice Manager and talk about a step that needs to be taken to eliminate duplicate immunization records from being sent to the registry. The steps I'm about to go over are only necessary if you are entering immunizations through clinical. If you only enter immunizations through Practice Manager, this step is not required. We are assuming at this point most practices are entering immunizations through clinical, which is why I'm emphasizing this step. So to eliminate the duplicate records, go to Add-ins, Clinical, Immunizations, Procedures. The Selected Procedures section on the right should have a list of all the immunization procedures you enter through Practice Manager only. If you document administering an immunization through clinical, then it should not be on this list. To remove the procedures that you document through clinical, highlight the procedure and click Remove. You can either select one at a time or use the Select All button if you are removing everything. You will most likely be removing all procedures from this screen if you are completing all progress notes electronically through clinical, as there shouldn't be a need to manually enter them anymore. Click Save when you are done. Next, we'll talk about Medicare Q codes and how they relate to this process. Q codes are required for Medicare billing, but are not accepted by your state registry. A procedure override will need to be added to all your applicable immunization procedures so you can continue to bill Medicare the appropriate CPT-4 code for payment and still have the vaccine records sent to your registry. To set this up, go to Administration, Transaction Tables, Procedure. Enter the IH code for the procedure you are looking for and hit Tab on your keyboard. Then click Billing Codes to the right. Click New. Then click the Billing Form dropdown and select the applicable Medicare P5 program for your state from this list. To the right in the Override Data section, enter the applicable Q code in the Billing Code field. Then click Add to List. You would then repeat those steps for any additional Medicare programs you bill to, including paper. When you are done modifying all your Medicare programs for this procedure, click Close and Save. You would then repeat those steps for any additional immunization procedures that you may bill to Medicare. Again, the purpose of this process is to ensure you are not sending unacceptable data to the registry while maintaining the ability to bill Q codes to Medicare. Next up is patient consent. We have made changes to how you will document the patient's consent when submitting data in the 2.5.1 format. Instead of doing so on the procedure dialog while you're documenting the immunization through your progress note, it is now done in the patient's account. Documenting consent information can be done in either Practice Manager or Clinical. I'll demo it through Practice Manager, but keep in mind it's located on the ID tab of the patient's chart in Clinical as well. So within Practice Manager, open the patient's account on the Patient tab. Then from the right, click the Consent button. This dialog allows you to configure consent information for multiple areas throughout the software. The immunization section at the bottom is the one that we will discuss. In ChartMaker Medical Suite version 5.4, which is what we are looking at here, the consent preferences you set will be applicable for all registries. However, in the next version, ChartMaker Medical Suite 2015, there will be an extra drop-down allowing you to select which registry you are configuring the consent for. Once you upgrade to ChartMaker Medical Suite 2015, if you send immunization data to multiple states, you will need to configure the consent per registry. So you will start by clicking the lookup icon to select the registry status. This is the status for the patient at the state registry. Typically, this is going to be active. Highlight the applicable status and click OK. Then click the lookup icon for Reminder Preference. The reminder preference is how the registry will notify the patient that an immunization is due. Some of the registries only accept certain codes, so please reference your state's user manual to obtain a list of valid codes for your state. Select the preference for this patient and click OK. If this patient does not want their data shared with other practitioners, check the box for Protect Immunization Data from Other Clinicians. If this box is selected, the registry will load the data but will not share it with other offices. This field is required to be addressed for all patients born before January 1st, 1998. If it is not addressed for these patients and immunization data is sent to the registry, your office will receive a rejection back from the registry. Your last step would then be to select the effective date for all three of the fields we just talked about: registry status, reminder preference, and the preference to protect their data. These fields will be defaulted to the current date, so as long as today's date is applicable, you do not need to physically change these fields. After you are done, click OK, and then save on the patient's account. Remember, configuring the consent is a one-time step that you will do for each patient that you administer vaccinations to once you are sending immunization data in the 251 format. Offices still sending data in any format other than 251 still need to document patient consent through the order procedure dialog in a clinical chart note. Now let's switch gears and discuss the changes that were made to the immunization entry dialog in Clinical. So within Clinical, we'll open a chart note and then select the immunization procedure from within a procedure checklist. This dialog has a few new and a few updated fields. In order not to leave anything out, I'll go over all the fields related to immunizations in this dialog. The exact information necessary to be documented for your state registry will be outlined in our state-specific user guides. The first section related to immunizations is the Manufacturers and Lot Numbers for this procedure section. This section will allow you to pick from a list of pre-populated lot numbers for this immunization to aid in speeding up the data entry process. The options you see in this section will have been entered by your staff through Practice Manager under Administration, Transaction Tables, Procedures. Once you are in the Procedures dialog, you would click Immunization, and this is where you would pre-populate this data. If you are administering an immunization from one of these pre-populated lots, click the applicable line and you will see the manufacturer, lot, and expiration display in the appropriate fields below. If you need to modify that information for any reason, or if you accidentally clicked on it and you didn't mean to, you will still have the ability to change this information. If you need to modify the manufacturer, click the lookup icon to search for it. If you need to modify the lot number, simply type the new lot number over the old one. And same goes for the lot expiration. If you need to modify it, you can either click in the field and type the new value, or click the drop-down and select from the calendar. VFC eligibility should be entered if you participate in the Vaccine for Children program within your state registry. If you need to document this, click the lookup icon and select the applicable code. Typically, you will be selecting one of the V codes. The disease immunity checkbox would be selected if this patient cannot receive this vaccination because they have already been exposed to the disease. Please remember that if you use this option, you should also be selecting the procedure not performed checkbox along with your corresponding reason as well. Select the historical checkbox if you are not administering this immunization today, but rather are just entering it for historical purposes. If you do so, also select the source of the information. The source will always default to source unspecified. However, if you would like to modify that, click the lookup icon, remove the defaulted text, and select the applicable option. To the right, you would then enter dose, route, and site information. These fields used to be free text fields. However, they have since been changed to structured data fields, meaning that for route and site specifically, you will need to enter an applicable code or click the lookup icon to find the applicable code. You can no longer just type anything in these fields. So you would then go ahead and type the value in the dose field. If it is not mLs, click the lookup icon to pick a different unit. Then enter the code for route or click the lookup icon. Select the appropriate option and click OK. Then do the same thing for site. The administered by field will default to the user that originally selected this procedure in the note. So if that was the doctor, but you as the nurse or MA are the one administering this vaccination, click the lookup icon to select your name instead. The facility field will default to the facility that was selected for this note, which is done at the top of the chart. If no facility is selected in the chart note, like we are seeing here, the default facility set up during the configuration process will be sent to the registry. Then you have the section on immunization consent. If you are sending data to your state registry in file format 251, this entire section is no longer necessary. All of this information is documented somewhere else in the software. This section was kept for legacy purposes and will be removed once everyone has converted to the new file format. Consent for immunization, permission to share, and consent date are all now documented through the consent button in either the ID tab of Clinical or the Patient tab in Practice Manager. The consenter's name will be pulled from the responsible party field in Practice Manager. However, you will not see it output in this dialog. If you are unsure whether this patient has a responsible party on file, or if you would like to document someone other than the responsible party, you can manually type that person's first and last name in here instead. The last thing you will need to document prior to saving this information is the vaccination information statement or VIS date associated with the informational sheet you gave to the patient. To do so, click the checkbox next to the immunization name and then click the appropriate date from the dropdown. So that's it. When you are done entering your immunization information, click OK. The last feature I'm going to show you is something we added to the batch process and will be really helpful, especially the first time you submit data in the new 251 format. We added a report that will display any immunization records that have invalid data. The purpose of this report is to fend off some of those pesky data errors you may receive for the immunization records you entered prior to upgrading. Some of the fields you document on the immunization dialog were affected by requirement changes, so it is possible that legacy data may not be formatted correctly. Running the invalid data report will identify those records. The report will look for any records with invalid data in the dose, route, or site fields. The report is accessed in the Vaccine Registry dialog and will run automatically when you attempt to generate a batch, but you will also have the ability to run it manually at any point in time. If you want to run the report manually without producing a batch as well, set your filter criteria on the Vaccine Registry dialog first. Then go to Tools, Invalid Data Report. If this is your first time running the report, most likely there will be a brief delay before the report dialog appears. You may also see a progress counter. The report will then display the records with invalid data in the dose, route, or site fields. The report will tell you the account associated with the invalid data, as well as the date of service, and which field has errors. If the immunization record was originally entered through Practice Manager, you can then go to the Clinical tab in Practice Manager, look up that account, and edit the immunization to fix the invalid data. If the immunization record was originally entered through Clinical, you will not be able to edit the record through Practice Manager. You will need to open a new note in Clinical, change the date to the date the vaccination was administered, and enter the correct data. You could then delete the original invalid record through Practice Manager. However, this step is not required, so it really depends on the preferences of your practice as to whether you do this or not. The purpose of the invalid data report is mainly to fix legacy data, so you will most likely not encounter it after you start sending data in the 251 format. Now, I just showed you how to run the report manually. However, as I mentioned earlier, the report will automatically be run whenever you generate a batch. So let me show you what that looks like. And while we're at it, I'll make a note of things that have changed in the Vaccine Registry dialog as well. So from within the Vaccine Registry dialog, start by selecting your format. You will notice that there are now more options in this dropdown. You will see a 2.3 version and a 2.5 version for each registry. Going forward, you will now select the 251 version of your registry. The 2.3 options are there for legacy purposes. Then select your practice by clicking on the lookup icon. Mine is already set, so I do not need to do this step. Next, select facility. Previously, with the 2.3 format, no one selected facility. However, in the 2.5 version, certain states are requiring this information. NICIS, Delvax, and Kids Plus require the facility. All other registries do not. So again, if you are in New York State, Delaware, or the city of Philadelphia, you do need to enter facility in this dialog. To select the facility, click the lookup icon, click Find, highlight the correct facility, and click OK. If you have multiple locations, you will be required to generate a batch file per location or facility. Next, select your date range and make sure your output directory and file name are applicable. And finally, the last modification to this dialog is that with the 2.5 format, you no longer need to select the immunization procedures from within this dialog. You will see a note at the bottom reminding you of this. If you switch back to a 2.3 version, you will see the option to select the procedures at the bottom appear again. So our final step to create the batch will be to click Save. If there are no invalid immunization records, the batch will be created like before. No dialogues will appear, and the file will be saved to the output directory location. However, if there are invalid records, you will now receive this dialog, giving you the chance to fix the information prior to creating the batch. The dialog will have an option to view the report immediately or continue without addressing it. If you click Continue, your immunization batch file will be created with the errors the dialog was referencing. If you click Cancel, no file will be created and it will take you back to the Vaccine Registry dialog. If you click View Report, you will see the same report we saw earlier when we manually generated it. Keep in mind that if you select View Report, look it over, and then close the report dialog, you will then be taken back to the Vaccine Registry dialog and no batch file will be created. The system assumes you will work off the invalid data report to fix the errors prior to generating the batch again. So let's recap. The first thing you want to make sure you do is to be on the latest version of ChartMaker Medical Suite. If you are unsure how to do this, you can call support. Then you want to make sure you have completed all training necessary and obtained a copy of any user guides that might be applicable. After that, you should be ready to make the one-time database changes we discussed in this course. They include update each staff member's username, add your facility ID or IDs to the vaccine registry configuration, walk through the steps of removing the immunization procedures that are entered through clinical in Practice Manager configuration so that duplicate records are not sent to the registry. And finally, add the procedure override information to the Medicare Q codes if you bill for these. Then, on an ongoing basis, remember to document the patient's consent through the Consent button in Practice Manager on the Patient tab, or in Clinical under the ID tab. And finally, do not forget that you may be prompted with the option to view the invalid data report when you are generating your batch file. If you are prompted by this, you should view the report and make any necessary changes prior to generating the batch again and uploading to your registry. If you do not address the invalid data, you will most likely receive error reports from your registry after you upload the file. If you are already sending data to your registry in format 2.3, please contact your registry representative to see if you need to re-enroll prior to sending 251 data. We know for sure that in certain instances, like with NJIIS, you do need to re-enroll first. That concludes our presentation today on the changes to the immunization entry process between version 2.3 and 251. If you have any questions regarding the information contained in this video, please contact customer support at 1-800-487-9135.